Welcome to NFL Nexus. Today, we're really going to get into it with the Cincinnati Bengals and a team-building philosophy that was basically forged in one single draft. We're going to explore how two key defensive players drafted just a handful of picks apart set this whole franchise on two completely different paths. We'll see how the choices they made back then are creating some very real roster holes for them today, and how it all leads to this fascinating high-stakes gamble they're facing in the upcoming draft. All right, let's dive in. But hey, before we really jump in, if this is the kind of deep dive into NFL strategy you love, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Liking this explainer and dropping a comment below with your take on what the Bengals are doing, it really helps us out a ton, and it keeps this whole conversation going. We seriously appreciate the support. And one last quick thing, I promise. If you're looking for a fun way to help support what we do here, check out our NFL-themed coloring books. They're awesome for kids, grandkids. Honestly, they're great for adults too. The link for that is right down in the description. Thanks again, folks. You know, every draft has its stories, right? But some drafts just define an entire era. For the Cincinnati Bengals, 2018 was that year. This was the last draft under head coach Marvin Lewis, the final curtain call on a 16-year run. The team, well, they'd kind of hit a wall. They were always competitive, always in the mix, but they could never, ever get over the hump. And this feeling of stagnation had really set in. The core of the team was getting older, and you could just feel a change was needed, and badly. They didn't know it at the time, but two picks, made in the second and third rounds, would lay the groundwork for everything that came next. The rise of a new culture, that incredible Super Bowl run, the tough goodbyes, and yeah, the roster holes they're still trying to patch up today. So to really get a grip on where the Bengals are going, we've got to go back to this one pivotal moment. We're going to break down that 2018 draft class, a class that gave them two unbelievable leaders who would end up having very, very different careers with the team that drafted them. Okay, so this was Marvin Lewis's very last draft. In the first round, the team took Ohio State center Billy Price, and that pick, well, it unfortunately just didn't pan out. But then, in the second and third rounds, they struck absolute gold. Twice. At pick 54, they snagged safety Jesse Bates III from Wake Forest, a player who had some truly rare athleticism for that position. And then, just 23 picks later, at number 77, they selected defensive end Sam Hubbard, another Ohio State guy and a true local hero. These two guys would become cornerstones of the defense that ultimately went all the way to Super Bowl LVI. On one side, you've got Jesse Bates, the elite, rangy, playmaking safety who pretty much instantly became one of the best in the entire league, an all-pro talent. He was the definition of a modern franchise building block on defense. And on the other side, you have Sam Hubbard, the Cincinnati kid born and raised, who became the absolute heart and soul of that locker room, a real leader and a massive fan favorite. Both of them were essential to the team's rise, but only one would end up a Bengal for life. This tale of two players is just so central to understanding how the Bengals build their team. So what was the big deal with Jesse Bates? Why was he so special? Well, the word you always hear is ball hawk. And in today's NFL, with these explosive passing offenses, having a safety who can just patrol the entire deep middle of the field, it's not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity. Bates had that elite sideline-to-sideline range. You know, back in the 2010s, every defensive coordinator was obsessed with finding the next Earl Thomas, and while that's a crazy high bar, Bates had the instincts and the athleticism to literally change the geometry of the field. He could erase a mistake on one side and then show up to undercut a route on the other. He was exactly the kind of player you dream of building a secondary around. And man, his impact, it was immediate. The Bengals actually released their veteran safety George Aloka late in the offseason, basically throwing the rookie Bates right into the fire as a starter, and he never looked back. By his third year, 2020, he was so dominant, racking up 15 passes defensed, that he was named a second-team All-Pro. He was a huge part of that magical 2021 Super Bowl run, leading all defensive backs in the postseason with two massive interceptions. But then came the business side of the game. The contract talks stalled. Bates' side, they wanted serious guaranteed money, which, is the only thing that really matters in an NFL contract. The Bengals, who have historically been pretty cautious with huge guarantees, they just weren't willing to go there. So they used the franchise tag in 2022, which is kind of like a one-year patch that usually means the end is near. And, yep, sure enough, in 2023 he walked, signing a huge deal with the Atlanta Falcons.
So did the Bengals make the right call letting him go? Well, this chart tells a pretty powerful story. In just 3 seasons with the Falcons, Bates has already piled up 13 interceptions. Now, to put that in perspective, he had 14 interceptions in 5 full seasons with Cincinnati. This wasn't a guy who just got paid and checked out. He actually got even better. He had 6 picks in his very first year in Atlanta, which got him his first Pro Bowl and another second-team All-Pro honor. This wasn't a player on the decline. The Bengals drafted and developed an elite premier talent at a critical position and then had to watch him continue that elite play for somebody else. It's just a tough pill to swallow for any franchise.
Okay, now let's pivot to Sam Hubbard, because his story, it builds a totally different kind of narrative. While Bates was the elite talent in coverage, Hubbard was the absolute soul of the team, and nothing, I mean nothing, captures that better than this one moment. The 2022-23 playoffs, against their rivals the Baltimore Ravens, it's a goal line stand, and then a 99-yard fumble recovery for a touchdown by Hubbard. As he was sprinting down that field, NBC's Mike Tirico called him the Cincinnati Kid. It was just a perfect all-time moment that cemented his legacy, not just as a great player, but as a local icon.
And his story really is something out of a movie. Born and raised in Cincy, a star at Ohio State, where he became good friends with some quarterback named Joe Burrow, you might have heard of him, and then he gets drafted by his hometown team. Hubbard was a different kind of player than Bates. Not a flashy pass rusher, but a super high-effort, incredibly reliable, elite run-defending end. And here's the key contrast. In the very same offseason that the front office was at a total standstill with Bates over long-term guarantees, they signed Hubbard to a 4-year, $40 million extension. He would go on to play his entire 7-year career right there in his hometown, a storybook ending the Bengals were clearly willing to pay for.
So why are we spending all this time on 2 guys from the 2018 draft? Why does this matter right now? Because every single financial decision has a ripple effect. When you decide to pay one player, it almost always means you might not be able to pay another. Letting an all-pro player walk, yeah, it saves you money, but it forces you to use other resources, like high draft picks, to fill new holes. And for the Bengals, those past decisions are directly connected to a major, major question mark on their current roster. And that brings us right to today. The Bengals are staring down a familiar dilemma, just at a totally different position. What do you do when a solid, reliable veteran leader is getting older and is on the very last year of his contract? It's a question every single front office has to answer, and it usually leads to some pretty uncomfortable choices. For Cincinnati, that question is staring them right in the face at the center of their offensive line. And the number you need to know right here is 33. That's the age of their starting center, Ted Karras. And in the brutal world of the NFL trenches, 33 is, well, it's getting up there. He's been a steady presence and a leader on that line since he got here, but he's entering the final year of his deal. The team has to start thinking about a succession plan because you never, ever want to get caught without one at such a critical spot protecting your franchise quarterback. So yeah, there's a real sense of urgency here. And when you look at the actual depth chart, you start to see just how shaky this situation really is. First off, Ted Karras, while he's reliable, was ranked 22nd out of 40 centers by Pro Football Focus last season. I mean, that's solid, but it's not elite. Second, the team recently waived their backup, Matt Lee, who was a 7th-round pick just a couple of years ago. That leaves a guy named Jacob Beyer, a former undrafted free agent, as the only other center on the roster. So what you have is an aging starter and no clear successor. This isn't just a future problem, this is a depth problem right now. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. The team knows it. This quote from their offensive line coach, Scott Peters, is incredibly revealing. Talking about the backup job, he says he's going to have to compete with somebody, whether that's done in free agency or in the draft. That right there is basically a public announcement that the status quo isn't good enough. They are actively looking to bring in competition not just for the backup role, but for the future of the entire position. It directly connects the dots from past decisions to future needs. And this, of course, brings us to the draft. With such a clear need at center, every other prospect evaluation gets way more complicated. Do you use a high pick to solve that problem, or do you take the best player available somewhere else? This forces the Bengals to confront a classic scouting debate with one of this year's top defensive prospects. It's a debate that pits what you see on the film against what you see on the measuring tape, a real high-stakes gamble between proven production and physical prototypes. And this number is at the dead center of the whole debate. 30 7/8 inches. That is the arm length of University of Miami defensive end prospect Ruben Bain Jr. Now, to give you some context, that is considered exceptionally short for an edge rusher, whose entire job is to get around these massive offensive tackles who have like 34-inch arms. If he's taken in the first round, he would have the shortest arms for a prospect at his position in 2 decades. This one measurement has scouts completely split. Now, why is this one little number such a big deal? Well, because history is not on his side. For the last 20 years, not a single NFL player with arms shorter than 31 inches has managed to get a double-digit sack season.
That is a huge, glaring, historical red flag. Sacks are the money stat for guys on the edge, and the data suggests that players with his physical profile have a very clear ceiling in the NFL. So drafting him, especially high, is a direct bet against 2 decades of precedent.
But then you get a powerful counter-argument, and it's coming from someone whose opinion carries a ton of weight. Current Bengals Pro Bowl offensive tackle Orlando Brown Jr. This is a guy who was also doubted for his own athletic measurables coming out of college, and he faces the best pass rushers in the league week in and week out. He sees the tape, not just the numbers. He admits the disadvantage, but he talks about Bain's unique set of skills and his ability to get up on you. And his final verdict? He's going to be able to come in the league and be just fine. I mean, that's a massive vote of confidence.
Orlando Brown Jr. compares him to guys like Brandon Graham and James Harrison. Now, think about those players for a second. They weren't these freakish athletes with ideal length. They won with other traits. They were incredibly strong, relentlessly physical, and they played with these nonstop motors. They were technicians who had a high football IQ, and they mastered leverage and hand fighting to beat their physical limitations. Brown sees those exact same qualities in Bain. It's a blueprint for success that relies on will and skill, not just physical gifts. And it's a pretty compelling case for why you should bet on the player, not the prototype. So let's bring all these threads together. The story of Jesse Bates and Sam Hubbard from the 2018 draft isn't just some ancient history lesson. It's the prologue to the story the Bengals are writing right now as they look to build their next era in the upcoming draft. Every single decision is connected. And it all really boils down to this relentless cycle of NFL team building. Step 1, you draft talent. You find a Jesse Bates, a Sam Hubbard, or maybe a Reuben Bain Jr. Step 2, you develop them into stars. Step 3, you face the tough choices. You just can't pay everybody. The Bengals paid Hubbard. They let Bates walk. That was their choice. And that inevitably leads to step 4. You have to use the draft to address the new needs created by those decisions, which is exactly why the center position is such a priority for them now. It's a perfect loop. The decision on Jesse Bates years ago is directly linked to whether they'll feel pressure to draft a center or gamble on a talent like Reuben Bain today.
Which leads us with the ultimate question, right? The one that every NFL GM has to answer on draft night. Is it better to trust the tape and draft a player like Reuben Bain Jr., who looks like an elite talent but has these historic physical red flags? Or do you play it safe, take a player who fits the physical prototype, and risk missing out on a truly special, game-changing star? That's the multi-million-dollar question facing the Bengals front office. What would you do? Let us know down in the comments. Thanks for watching NFL Nexus. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.